Good afternoon, everyone, from the campus of Notre Dame. Thank you for joining us in this seminar, the webinar that is going to review college savings. First thing we want to state is that we are not financial advisors. We want to be sure to draw a bright red line in the sand, as we've been hearing in the news lately. Our purpose today is to share some information about the importance of saving for college and the various options that will be out there and some things to be thinking about. But again, we're not financial advisors, and financial advisor information is best obtained from experts. The fact that college costs have been rising is very much in the news these days. It's typically a headline for the media. It's a concern for policymakers, both in Washington as well as on campuses, and it certainly is a concern for families. The graphic that we have up right now is a product of the College Board, and they produce this annually. It's public information, but the top line going across would be the average private four-year cost for tuition, fees, room and board, $39,520. Another important fact here is that the next line, $23,840, would be what we call the net price. That is what the typical student attending an institution would be receiving in grant and scholarship aid, subtracted from that first number, which is typically referred to as the sticker price. So the net price would be after scholarships and grants. Again, for four-year privates, tuition, fees, room and board. The next line is the sticker price for the four-year public, and the next and final line would be the net price after scholarships and grants. The general approach to helping to prepare for college and how to pay for it once it begins and afterwards perhaps is to consider it three different ways, three different opportunities to pay. One is to plan and save as much as possible from the earliest possible date. The next would be during the 4 years of college, paying from income and assets. And finally, after college is over, if any financing had been done, paying the payments back to the lender. So how do you go about, as a family, trying to figure out what you might need? There are some very excellent public resources now made available both from the federal government, Department of Education, as well as the College Board and some other vendors who are in the business of helping families figure out what it's going to cost in so many years in the future, and then also what would be expected to me from me as a family, from us as a family, to contribute, and what the difference is going to be. So what's the cost going to be down the road? What will the current process and formulas and methodologies suggest that we should be reasonably able to afford? And then what's the difference? Once we get to the difference, and it's a very rough estimate, then we have to figure out how we're going to come up with the difference. One of the biggest and most frequently heard questions that we experience in the world of student aid and the whole question of affording college is that the concern that if I plan and save for my child's education, that effort is going to be treated punitively in the world of student aid. There's a very basic misconception and misunderstanding, an assumption, a false assumption, that simply not having enough money and showing up for college will automatically mean that if you can demonstrate that you need money, you're going to receive what you need. That's a false assumption. There are only a handful of schools, literally 3 or 4 dozen schools among thousands, especially high-cost privates, where the policy of the institution is that, and where there are enough resources that allow the institution to say, if you're admitted, we can make this happen. We will have the resources. We will be able to make it reasonably affordable. That, unfortunately, is not the case across the country for the vast majority of institutions. Either they can't help the family meet what's been demonstrated as need and eligibility, or they can, but it's going to involve a significant amount of borrowing and financing. The other misconception and misunderstanding about how college savings are treated in the world of student aid is that if I have money in the bank, and let's say it's $100,000, and the cost of the school for that given year is $50,000, I have more than $50,000 saved, so I won't be eligible, my student won't be eligible for any help because we have resources. That's not the way the process works. Use the number of $100,000 as an amount that might be in the bank, just for illustration purposes here. The way the financial aid system works is that when it reviews the assets of a family, it understands and tries to recognize the fact that families build assets for a number of reasons. They build for retirement, they build for other children's educational expenses, they build for emergencies, they may also be building for a certain lifestyle once they do retire above the basic. So families build assets for a lot of reasons. The closer a family is to retirement, the more the need for protection of those assets before they can be considered available to help pay for the individual student's costs for the coming year. So there's built into the process what's called an asset protection allowance. And the older parent is, closer to retirement, the greater that asset protection allowance would be. So let's just use an example. $100,000 in savings. Perhaps the asset protection allowance for this particular family is $40,000. The difference, or the net assets that are available to be considered, would be roughly $60,000. The assessment rate of that $60,000 is not the whole $60,000. In fact, it's less than 6%. Typically, it's between 5 and 6% of that $60,000 or the net asset after the asset protection allowance has been incorporated. So we've gone from a $100,000 savings account to a very small, far less daunting number than what most families would assume is going to happen. So that the whole point here is that the financial aid process is not as punitive as many people feel it is, and it's also important to know that the first point, that not every school in the country is going to be able to say, here's what you need, even though you've demonstrated that you need it. Wouldn't you as a family rather be in a position to say, when the day arrives for college, that your son or daughter has been admitted to a fine school, we can make this happen because we've done some planning and saving? Or we can certainly make it more reasonable if indeed additional financing is going to be involved. So in general, one of the questions that we often deal with is, should the asset be in the parent's name or in the student's name? And in the world of financial aid, if it's a student-owned asset, it is treated fairly severely. In other words, a good percentage of it's going to be of a student-owned asset is going to be expected to be available for the coming year. And currently, it's 20%. So if there's $1,000, 20% of that $1,000 is going to be expected to be available for the coming year. On the other hand, if it's owned by the parents, even if it's a 529 program dedicated to the student, it's a parent-owned asset if it's a 529, and as such is treated the same as all other parental assets. And we just went through how that treatment is nowhere near as harsh as certainly 20% taxation rate would be for the individual student. So we want to keep in mind that as we consider what assets are going to be included with the parents, the financial aid process does not look at retirement assets. It, for the federal programs, doesn't look at home equity in the principal place of residence. Many institutions, although they gather home equity information, may very well exclude it in the primary place of residence. If you own your own business or own your own farm, there's a very generous protection for some of those assets before any review of those assets are considered in the world of financial aid. Keep in mind that if it's a student-owned asset, even 529s could be student-owned. At age 18, the student takes over and can control how that asset's going to be spent, whether it's for college or not. If it's a parental loan asset, and especially a 529, Those dollars can be distributed only for qualified educational expenses as defined by the IRS.